So let's get started. Thank you all for joining our educational webinar on the biosimilar switch, British Columbia, Alberta. My name is Stephanie Carter. I'm a co-founder and director of HS Heroes, and I'll be moderating the session. Tonight, we are joined by Suzanne Gulliver. She is an epidemiologist with a BA and MPH who will be making a presentation on the non-medical switch and biosimilars. After the presentation, there will be a Q&A session where Suzanne will be joined by Crystal Sutherland, my fellow HS Heroes co-founder and Alberta resident who has been following the transition and can provide a view through the patient lens. Your lines are muted and will remain muted at all times. During the session, if you have any questions, you can send them to me via the Q&A button found at the bottom of your screen. I'll compile all questions received and post them to the speakers at the end of the presentation. And now I'll pass it over to Suzanne.
Hey, everyone. I'm Suzanne Gulliver. I am an epidemiologist. I wrote my master's thesis on of reasons for biologic discontinuations. So yeah, hold on now. I have to try and get this. We practiced, but here we are. I'm just going to get these slides up there now and life will be good. Oh, I can't share my screen, Stephanie. It says that. Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So we're going to have a chat about non-medical switching and biologics, which is kind of scary, but well, it sounds scary, but it's not. My disclosures are I've gotten research grants, I've done advisory boards, and I've done speaking engagements for Novartis, Pfizer, AbbVie, Janssen, and UCB, which are all pharmaceutical companies. So we're going to jump right into it, what is non-medical switching? Non-medical switching is when a patient is switched from one treatment to another for non-medical reasons, such as a drug withdrawn from the market or drug cost. A medical reason would be you have an adverse event, it stops working for you, or you lose efficacy. But this is for a non-medical reason. We saw non-medical switching in biologics when eculizumab, which is Raptiva, was withdrawn from the market in 2009 for safety reasons. There were two cases of brain swelling, and the company whose name escapes me at the time, but Serono just decided to pull the plug. And so in 2009, we had this big scramble to switch patients off of Raptiva, even though, there were thousands of patients on this drug, but it was withdrawn because of safety concerns. So we had a big scramble trying to get patients switched then, which was, painful, as are most non-medical switches. And then we had it happen again 2 years later when Elafisept, which is Amaveve, was withdrawn to the market because of lack of sales. The manufacturer just decided they weren't selling enough of it to be worth the cost of manufacturing, which we'll see why these drugs cost so much further on in the talk. In these cases, the patients had to be switched to completely different treatments, right? Eculizumab was a TNF, and we have different classes of drugs, which is, I should have had a slide on that. But anyways, biologics are classified into different types of drugs because of which part of the immune system that they target. So adalimumab, Humira, and, Raptiva, what else is a TNF? Symphony, which is golimumab, those are all TNFs. Stelara is an anti-IL-12/23. But these patients had to be switched completely off of eculizumab and Elafisept because they just were not available. So we had to switch them to different drugs. Now In the case of Elafisept, there was nothing else in class because I think it's a CD4 inhibitor. Could be wrong. It's been a long time. But so we ended up having to do, well, switching the eculizumab patients in class, we could not switch them to another version of eculizumab. So yeah, again, okay, this duplicate slide, but we'll be fine. Okay, so why is this happening? My medication is still available, like we talked about with the Elafisept and the eculizumab patients. Their drug was no longer being manufactured by anyone. Adalimumab, Humira, and Remicade, and all of these originator drugs are still being manufactured. So why are you being switched? Well, now we're seeing that the patents on what we call the originator drugs have expired. So biosimilars are entering the market and they're making biologics more affordable, just like we saw with the generic drugs. Now there's a difference between biosimilars and biologics. You also may hear them, the biosimilars being referred to as subsequent entry biologics, which was the original term when they came to market 6 years ago. So in this circumstance, the non-medical switch means you're staying on your original medication, you know, adalimumab, infliximab, but you're switching brands, and that's the real difference. Like the names like Humira, Remicade, and Enbrel are all brand names. You're actually taking adalimumab, infliximab, or etanercept. Like how some people call all facial tissues Kleenex. The Kleenex is the brand name. So are biosimilars just generic drugs? The short answer is yes, but it's a lot more complicated than that because biologics are proteins that have to be synthesized in a living system. It's not simple chemistry. This requires a lot of really cool, but really complex growing and synthesizing of proteins to create these medications, because our bodies don't create these on their own. So we're going to look at biologics versus drugs. So biologics are these large, complex molecules with lots of peptides and all these sequences, whereas drugs they're small molecules. You can draw them very easily like you did in chemistry class. The biologics are manufactured in a living system. So they're grown in what's called a bioreactor. Your drugs are chemically synthesized. So you create your chemical reaction and Bob's your uncle. Biologics are sometimes challenging to fully characterize, and to do the model of the protein is really difficult, but we can fully characterize the chemical composition of drugs. The mechanism of action may not be well understood in biologics, whereas in drugs, they're very well understood. Our immune systems are very, very complex creatures, and we see that the mechanism of action is pretty well understood. We don't understand why some people respond extremely well and some people don't to the same drug for the same disease state. And like I said earlier, biologics are challenging to duplicate exactly. Drugs can be exactly duplicated. The active ingredient in biosimilars is highly similar to the reference product. In drugs, the active ingredient is chemically identical to the reference product. Now, highly similar in the biologics, which we'll also get to because we're going to talk about how they're manufactured. No batch of biologics is the same because they are synthesized proteins that are grown. No two batches even of your originator drug is the same. They're all slightly different. Biologics are approved on the basis of extensive in vitro comparability testing It should have been compatibility and comparability testing, but here we are. And for generic drugs, they're approved on the basis of the analytical similarity and how close they are with bioequivalence to their active ingredients. With biologics, again, it's how close they are to your reference protein. And there's a range of how different it can be from that original protein for it to be approved. And if it's outside of that range, unfortunately, that whole batch just gets destroyed. And that's how it is even with the originator drugs. If something, for whatever reason, doesn't go the same in the bioreactor, you got to get rid of it because it's not the same or it's not similar enough. So they're very complex to manufacture. This is actually one of the least complex diagrams you can see. Basically, you start at the beginning with your seed train where your cell line is, and then you start with your seeding and your cell culture, and then that big yellow one there in the middle, that's your bioreactor where it's growing and growing. And then it's purified, and you remove the proteins because it's not just the proteins you want that grow in there. There's other ones that we have to remove, and and they call it cleaning. And then once that's done, you put in whatever preservatives need to be put in them, and then you fill your syringes or your lyophilized vials, and it gets shipped off to be dispensed to patients. So yeah, the process, no matter who manufactures the biologic, is the same. The only difference is the bioreactor. That's the only part of any of this that is actually proprietary now that the patents have expired. And like I said, every batch of biologic is slightly different from one another, no matter who's manufacturing it. It's the nature of the beast. You're growing proteins and synthesizing them. So it's always going to be different. Every AbbVie batch is different. Every Janssen batch is different. And like I said earlier, there are rules on how similar each batch must be. And biosimilars actually have an even smaller range of variants from that originator molecule. So it's all very, very, very strongly monitored. And, if it is not close enough to the reference molecule, then it's gone. And that's why you end up having different reactions different times. Like some people will have a headache, or you'll have a site reaction after an injection one time, and then another time you won't. And that's because the batches are slightly different. So your body reacts slightly differently to each batch. I remember we had a batch of a drug a couple of years ago, and everybody was having headaches on that batch. It wasn't bad headaches, but it was enough that we took notice. So the analogy that I always give when I'm talking about biosimilars is the chocolate chip cookies. It's the same cookie recipe, but different ovens mean slightly different cookies. So your different bioreactor means you're still getting your chocolate chip cookies, but they're slightly different. Like you use grandma's recipe at grandma's house in her oven, they're going to be a little bit different than when you bake them yourself at your house, but you're still getting grandma's chocolate chip cookies. So here we are now, we're at the big question. So, we're going to talk about, do the biosimilar manufacturers know what they're doing? It seems like they haven't been doing this long. I have private insurance. Will I have to switch? Will the biosimilar be just as effective as my previous treatment? Will I have to start my loading doses again? Will I develop antibodies because of the biosimilar? And is this the end of the world? Because I know a lot of people feel that way. It's not, I promise. So do the biosimilar manufacturers know what they're doing? Yes. Most of these manufacturers have been making biologics since biologics first came to market years ago. And also there are companies who are contracted to manufacture in cases where they don't own their own manufacturing. There are several very, very well managed, experienced manufacturers around the world who are contracted to do it if there are companies that don't own their own manufacturing facilities. And what is kind of interesting, just the example down here, is some of these manufacturers who are making biosimilars are actually the original patent holders. The big example is Merck now makes an infliximab biosimilar. However, they were the original manufacturer and were the original patent holders of infliximab, and they sold it to Janssen in the mid-2000s. And now they're back where they started, making infliximab. I have private insurance. Will I have to switch? No. At the moment, it's only the provincial public plans in some province that are the only ones mandating the non-medical switching as a cost-saving measure. You're looking at a savings of up to 50%. And when you're looking at like infliximab, for example, that's $1,000 a vial. That adds up pretty quickly. So if you can cut that cost in half to be able to still manage people's disease and give them a quality of life that they don't have when they are not on a biologic, then that's what governments are going to do. One thing I will say is that your private insurer may decide to do non-medical switching in the future. I do not run them. They are businesses. They may decide that non-medical switching is what's right for them. But here we are. So will the biosimilar treatment be just as effective and safe as my previous treatment? Yes. Biosimilars have been proven to be just as effective and safe as the originator drug, and they have to be approved by the regulators like Health Canada and the FDA and the European health authorities. Like I said, there's a margin of variance, and theirs is even smaller than the originator drug. It has to fit well within their levels of variance. And like we talked about before, it's the same molecule, it's just a different brand, and it will still work to modulate your immune system in the same way. So you're still getting your chocolate chip cookies. You may flare due to the upset caused by the switch, which is why we're doing this talk. Because as we all know, most people with diseases that we manage with biologics tend to flare with stress. So if you're really, really worried about what's going to happen, you might flare. And that's what we're trying to avoid here is, making sure that you have the information you need so that you are comfortable with what is going to happen and that you will feel okay with this. And it will be okay. In Ireland, they actually switched everyone back in 2015, all of the infliximab patients, the rheumatoid arthritis patients. They did a big switch right across the board, switched to the Hospira biosimilar, which is now owned by Pfizer. And they didn't tell anyone. Nobody knew because the Irish government was like, well, it's either this or we run out of money and all of these people are in misery again. So that's what they did. And they didn't see any difference, any spike in patients, having adverse events, losing efficacy, and any of that. So that is one thing that is always so encouraging that, it happened and nothing bad happened. Will I have to do my loading doses again? No. You'll continue on your usual dosing schedule just as always. One thing I will say, sometimes doctors reinduce patients who are flaring as a way to get your disease under control without having to change your therapy. This may happen, but it won't be because you switched brands. Sometimes you do reinduction for flares and things like that. Or if you ended up having to take a break from your medication because of surgery or infection or any number of things, and you've been a while without it, then they will reinduce you, but it won't be because you switched, which I know a lot of the HS Humira patients will be very happy about because that is 4 needles. That's rough. It's rough, but you guys are champs, so. Will I develop antibodies because of the biosimilar? No, they're not associated with any particular brand of biologic. And if you do end up developing antibodies, there's something you would have developed eventually if you'd switched or not, because again, it's the same molecule, it's the same cytokine inhibitor that's going into your body. So you would have developed them anyways. But also the presence of antibodies doesn't necessarily mean the drug stops being effective. There are patients who develop antibodies who keep responding to treatment, and there are patients who stop responding to treatment who don't develop antibodies. That goes back to our whole discussion on how mechanisms of action aren't fully, completely understood. And, how is it that if you have drug antibodies flowing through your body, you're still responding and you're still in remission? Who knew? It is what it is. Sometimes if you have antibodies, they may have to tighten up your dosing. You can close up a dosing period and be more frequent because your body then, where you have the anti-drug antibodies, it loses efficacy faster, but it's still might work for you. Also, anti-drug antibodies are only measured for GI patients, and they're really not a concern for any other disease state because they're just not measured. Insurers, the provinces, hospitals, they don't pay for antibody measurement for anyone but GI. So you could have antibodies and not know. And so they're really not a concern. And even in GI, I have friends who are gastroenterologists, and some GIs will say, oh, antibodies, switch them right away. And others are like, well, let's wait and see. They're still responding. And just because they have antibodies doesn't mean that they're not going to respond. So, that's up to every individual GI on what they do, but the opinions are out there that antibodies don't necessarily mean a whole lot, which you'll see in a slide we see next, which shows that different disease states have different rates of antibody development. This comes out of all of the pivotal trials for infliximab, which all have hilarious acronym names, like the rheumatoid arthritis was ATTRACT. But what we saw was with the rheumatoid arthritis, 8 to 11% had drug antibody. Again, this data does not mean that these patients lost efficacy. It just means that there were antibodies in their blood. And we don't, I'm sure Janssen has that data to tell us which patients fit into both of those categories, but they have not released that. So here we are. I'm actually going to ask someone about that, but here we are. And then psoriatic arthritis, 16% developed antibodies. The ankylosing spondylitis, 6%. The Crohn's disease, 7 to 10%. Ulcerative colitis, 6 to 11%. And then psoriasis, 27%. But here's the fun thing. 27% of psoriasis patients developed antibodies. But psoriasis patients tend to, when they do well with a drug, they tend to stay on it. So, and again, it's not a measure we use in psoriasis at all. So, we can have patients walking around with a body full of antibodies and we wouldn't know, right? And It's been a long time, but as I recall, significantly more patients than 20, yeah, they definitely more than 27% did well because otherwise the drug wouldn't have been approved. So, right, antibodies does not necessarily mean that you're going to lose efficacy. And definitely, and if you do, it may not be right away. And if you're not a GI patient, they're not going to measure them. They only measure them in clinical trials because it's one of those things they do just to see if it is a predictor. And so far it hasn't been one. It's only been in GI that it's even marginally a predictor. Well, it's more than marginally, but it's been a predictor. And even then, because our immune systems are what they are, it's not a predictor for everybody. So is this the end of the world? And it's definitely not the end of the world. I can see it feeling that way when all you know is that you're being told you're being taken off of this medication that has helped you get your life back and to exist and be, happy. And I totally get that, but it's not. It's going to be a transition and hopefully it will go well, but it'll be okay. It's not this scary, horrible thing that it has been made out to be. And that's been a problem, is that patients haven't been armed with the information that they deserve to be able to understand and process what is happening. So we're hoping that you guys now have the information you need to figure this out and to, be okay, because you will be okay. And, there are other options. If it does turn out that this doesn't work for you, there are other options. In HS, aren't things approved yet, but there are clinical trials. As much as people hate talking about it, there's a lot of off-label use going on as well. So again, it'll be okay. We will get through it together, and hopefully these transitions will be very smooth. And there we go. Questions, concerns, and ask away.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. We had a few questions come in while you were speaking. The first is, I just started a medical trial for bimekizumab. Forgive my pronunciation. Thank you. Forgive my pronunciation. And they want to know if it isn't sorry, let me rephrase. They just started this clinical trial for their HS because doxycycline and finasteride isn't working. And will they be switched off of this, or are clinical trials safe during the switch?
Clinical trials are safe. Clinical trials are for drugs that haven't come to market and haven't been approved yet. So your clinical trial drug is safe. So you don't have to worry at all about your clinical trial drug.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, will this transition eventually happen all across Canada?
I would say that's where it's headed. The provinces are looking to save money, and this is one way that they can. So I would say it's coming. It's, when is the question, but it will come.
And the final question we have here is, if the biosimilar doesn't work, or if there are adverse side effects, can they switch back to Humira and have it covered, or are there certain exceptions?
It depends on the province and what their criteria are. And again, it all really depends on the province and what they've decided the criteria are, if they're going to allow you to switch back, or if they're going to get you to go to a different treatment. Now, I will say, if you were going to have an adverse event, they're very rare now. They were significantly more common in the beginning. Like I remember back in the beginning of infliximab, which was Remicade, and you used it's been 20 years, and there used to be so many anaphylactic events. And touch wood wherever it is around me, we haven't had one in years and years and years. So, and there's a whole host of reasons why with the infliximab you did have it. It's intravenous, it goes directly into your veins. It's a chimeric antibody and 1,000 other things that, well, not 1,000, but there's a bunch of reasons why you used to have more infusion reactions. So if you are going to end up building up to, an injection site reaction or an infusion reaction, then that was something that was probably coming because your body is not happy with the adalimumab or the infliximab or the etanercept. And again, things like just injection site reactions where you get this rash, they vary from lot to lot. I've seen that as well, that you get a certain batch and people are getting rashes, more so than usual. And then once because you get your boxes of 2, and once the lot number switches, all of a sudden it's not happening as much. So when it's not a dangerous adverse event, or you're not losing efficacy or having paradoxical reaction or something like that. Paradoxical reactions are when you end up, your disease gets worse, or you end up developing one of the other diseases that is treated with that drug. I have seen an HS patient develop psoriasis when on Humira. I've seen GI patients develop psoriasis on Humira. And then when you withdraw therapy, it goes away. The other disease comes back, but the psoriasis goes. So again, our immune systems are fascinating but bizarre things that, you block the TNF and you put, the HS in remission or the Crohn's in remission, and then for some reason it manifests in the skin as psoriasis. It's again, fascinating, but also not fun for the people who have to experience it.
Great, thank you. The next question is, are the new biosimilars going to be safe for women to take during pregnancy?
Yeah, if they're safe to take if the originator drug is safe to take during pregnancy, then so is the biosimilar. Depending on who you talk to, some physicians are right on the side of caution. The GI crowd are actually the great pioneers in biologics and pregnancy, because the GI crowd unfortunately have very delicate disease, and keeping them in remission, they can't, their dosing has to be when it's supposed to be to keep their disease under control. So they pioneered this, and they will keep a pregnant woman on a biologic very close up into delivery, and stop it for a little bit. And then, shortly after birth, depending on breastfeeding, they'll start up again. And even if they're breastfeeding, what they'll end up doing is delaying the vaccination of the baby for a few months, because no one's quite sure if it's transferred through the breast milk, and where the MMR vaccine is live, you don't want to, because you can take a killed vaccine on a biologic, but the live vaccines like MMR, you can't take. So that's why they delay the vaccination of the baby. So they will be safe. If the originator biologic is, then the biosimilar will be.
Okay, the next question is, I'm going to read it verbatim.
I was just going to add in to that real quick too. I don't believe they're making juveniles and pregnant women switch
No.
over in Alberta or BC right now either.
No,
So
yeah. And again, and also in pregnancy, the last thing you need is the stress of switching. So yeah, I read that too. Yeah. Yeah.
Just to touch on the COVID vaccines as well, because this is one of the questions. My doctor said it was completely safe. Everyone's saying it's safe for people on biologics. I'm on Remicade and I've had my first vaccine, or first dose
I'm on
rather.
Humira and I've had my first vaccine.
So we know that that's safe.
It is, yeah. I mean, some people, I had a chat with this about this actually earlier today with one of my friends who is on Remicade. And there was this big hullabaloo at the vaccine center about, oh, you're on an immunosuppressant. No, you guys are immunomodulated, right? Biologics are immunomodulators. They modulate your immune system. They regulate the parts of your immune system that are producing too much. You're producing too much TNF or IL-17 or IL-23. Your biologic will regulate that part of your immune system to make sure it's not overreacting. So you're not immunocompromised, you're immunomodulated. And there's this big concern, oh, can you take this? And you can. Some physicians will suggest that you try to time your vaccination doses right in the middle of your dosing period. So, if you're on Humira every 2 weeks, right in the middle, after, in between week to get your vaccine.
I think we're on it. HS patients I know I take it every week.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's what I was getting to. I was going to say, but HS patients are every week. So, try to do it on day 3. But again, there's no evidence to say that because again, they're not live vaccines and it's not a full-on immunosuppressive agent. So it's not going to squash your immune response to your vaccines. So, the guidance is halfway between, but if you can't, it's not going to make that big of a difference.
And weren't they using biologics like when COVID first came out and to stop, the
cytokine storm?
Yeah. And they were proving to be helpful.
Yeah, and they still are in some cases.
I remember during the SHSA conference, they had limited data, but they did indicate that people who were on biologics fared a little bit better when contracting COVID-19.
And the So Protect registry actually released data, and they found that the psoriasis patients on biologics did better, which makes sense, because if the cytokines that are dysregulated in COVID are the same ones being targeted by your biologic, then it can only help.
Great, thanks. The next question is just in reference to the clinical trial we spoke about a few minutes ago. If the drug is not approved, will they be able to stay on that drug regardless, or will they get switched back to another therapy?
That depends on a lot of things. It hasn't been approved for psoriasis yet, but that's coming. And if this was a pharma-sponsored thing, I wouldn't be able to say this, but if your physician is on it and can get the company, because here's the thing, if it's approved for use and it goes to market, then you can have access to it. If it doesn't get approved and they're not making it anymore because they didn't get approval, it's going to be approved for psoriasis. The data on that is fantastic. Then they'll be able to use it off-label. If you can get that, if it's approved for a dermatological reason, and your physician can convince the company, listen here, they did really well on this trial, and then you can apply for special authorization use for that indication. And so hopefully you will be able to stay on it. but I'm also really hoping it does well in HS. So
Just to
And like
add on to that.
your derms don't want to see you fail either, right? Like they're gonna make sure that you're gonna be kept up, and like they're gonna be guiding you through this as well to make sure that it's a smooth transition, because they don't want all their patients out of remission either.
no, no, right? And that's the thing, right? Is like we're currently, in Newfoundland, we haven't had that yet. All of our new starts have to go on a biosimilar. And what we're doing now is trying to feel out who has the best patient support program, and get that figured out, and who is going to take care of our patients best, because that's who's getting the script. Because if they are not taking care of you guys and making sure that everything is seamless with approval and switching, making sure that if you need compassionate and you need updosing, that it's getting done and you don't have to pay out of pocket, and making sure, because that's their job, is to make your life and the physicians' lives easier, because it's a pain to get this done. I remember the beginning, trying to get approval for these drugs was brutal. The hoops we had to jump through, the letters, like you had to beg, and it was awful trying to get approval. That's why they put these programs in place, was so that the patients and the physicians and their staff wouldn't be burdened with all this. Now it's a lot easier now because there's criteria for, to get approval. But at the time it was a free-for-all and it was brutal. Trying to get anyone approved was near impossible. We did it, but it was rough.
One thing I wanted to ask you that I hadn't asked before, how like I haven't got a letter yet. Like how are we going to get notified about this? Like, will they send letters in the mail, or are you just going to, all of a sudden the delivery won't show up, and is it on your clinic, or how does the whole process go?
They're supposed to, I know I have spoken to AbbVie and they have told me that we're going to get a list of the patients who are public patients. So that way we're ready for when this comes. I haven't heard anything about this coming in Newfoundland, Labrador, but so theoretically, you guys should get a letter from the government.
Okay, because remember in 2019, I didn't get a letter from the government. I got a letter from my insurance providers saying that they were gonna switch it, and then we got a year extension because of COVID. So I was just wondering how it I know this just happened May 1st, so I'm sure they need a bit of time, because I think we have a year to switch over. Is that correct?
Yeah. And and that was your private insurance, right? The person who was paying for it told you that they were going to pay for something else, right? So
which I understand. I mean, it's the same, basically the same product. Why would you pay more, right? Like
exactly. And unfortunately, when the infliximab biosimilar came to market in 2015, the Janssen refused to negotiate and lower the price, and they stuck hard to that. And as a result, these non-medical switches have started happening because the governments are like, what? Well, you're not going to lower the price, so we're just going to go to the people with the lower prices.
Because you can't have a monopoly on a product in Canada.
No.
Great, thanks, ladies. The next question is, are biosimilars safe to take with other biologics such as, and forgive my pronunciation, Emgality?
Emgality.
EMGALITY.
Yes, if they are safe to take with the biologic you are on, like if it's safe to take Humira with Emgality, then it will be safe to take your biosimilar. My grandmother takes Simponi for her RA, and then she takes I forget what the name of the one for the bone density, but she takes those together and they are safe to take together. So as long as you can take the originator with it, then there shouldn't be an issue.
Great, thank you. The next question I'm going to read verbatim. It says, I've been having shortness of breath since I've been vaccinated almost 3 weeks ago. My family doctor seems to think it may be because I'm already on Humira. So is there a tie with shortness of breath and being on a biologic while getting the vaccine?
That I could not tell you. I would ask your dermatologist. We haven't seen that yet, but anything is possible in medicine. You know, there are highly improbable things, but anything is possible. So yeah, check with whoever's prescribing your Humira and see what's going on there.
Go ahead, Crystal.
I was just going to say, I thought it was really interesting how you said, you know, some patients can be on Humira or Remicade and then develop psoriasis, or and like with the comorbidities, the associated diseases that come with HS.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, for example, like I have HS and then all of a sudden I got like Crohn's or something, like could you take 2 biologics, or would it one biologic treat both diseases?
Theoretically, they should treat both. Like we have patients who have psoriasis and Crohn's, we have patients with HS and psoriasis. That is in fact how a lot of the time you figure out if a disease state, if a disease is going, or if a medication is going to treat a disease in the real world, is you find a patient with both and see if they respond.
And you probably see a lot of that crossing over with the inflammatory diseases, right?
Yeah. And I mean, like patients, like there's 2 types of well, there's plenty of types, but the 2 main types of arthritis are rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis. And both of those 2 different types of arthritis respond to the same medications for the most part.
That's really neat. Because I used to always wonder, like, you know, I would say to Steph, well, you know, like we can get psoriasis or this Crohn's, or well, I wonder if they can get HS as a comorbidity, or if HS is listed as a comorbidity to them. Sorry, it's just so off topic.
I don't know, but it would be interesting to see it, and especially with the patients with both, which came first. Was it the HS or was it the psoriasis, right? That is a very interesting question that we should look into.
The chicken or the egg dilemma.
Exactly, right?
All right, the next question is, will compassionate pricing be offered with the new biosimilars?
It darn well better be. And that is what the patient support programs are about. And the patient support programs should be picking up the tab for your copays as well. They say that they won't, and you know, I'm sure that industry people will be unhappy with me, but you tell them you can't afford that copay, they pick it up, and that's how that should be. You should not have to pay 20% or even $2, really, if that's your dispensing fee. You tell the patient support program you can't afford it, and they will and should pick it up.
Great. And the last question we have is, are the side effects of biosimilars similar to Humira or originator biologics?
Yeah. We have yet to see a different side effect that hasn't, because it's the same protein, it's the same molecules. So we haven't seen anything different with those.
All right.
And the side effects can always be different because like she said earlier, the medication's live. So every batch is going to be different.
Exactly. But
even with your originator.
Exactly. But the ones that we've identified with the originators are the same with the biosimilars.
Well, thanks so much, ladies. Do either of you have any closing remarks you'd like to make?
I just want to say that, I know it's scary and it's a change, and even if it's not scary, it's a hassle. Um, you know, but it'll be okay. And your doctor and, these HS Heroes and other patient groups will get through it together. Like, that's what we're all in this together, and we will get through these non-medical switches, and we will try and get it done as smoothly as possible, because you guys deserve this to be as painless as possible.
Yeah, and I wanted to just thank you so much, Suzanne, for coming on, because I know you really put me at ease when I first found out about this, because I was really scared. I was angry. I thought, you know what? I worked so hard for the past 4 years, and now I'm going to lose my quality of life. And it wasn't something to be afraid of. I worked myself up for nothing. And when we saw people really getting upset about this, we wanted to be able to come to you as soon as possible and let you know that this is a pain, and you have a right to feel the way you do, but it isn't the end of the world, and we'll get through this together.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you're not the first person who's, come to me in a panic and said, Suzanne, what's happening? What is this about? And, and it's so important that we make sure that everyone has the information they need to process and understand and realize that it'll be okay. It's not going to be the end of the world. You're not going to lose your quality of life. And, if it just so happens that, it works out that you lose efficacy after the switch, because the universe is cruel sometimes, and it's going to be then we're going to find another solution. Though, just because one drug stops working for you doesn't mean that we're not going to find another one, and we're going to keep working to make sure that you keep your quality of life, or hopefully it gets even better.
Well said. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. If you'd like to rewatch or share this webinar, you can find it later this week on our website, hsheroes.ca. Or for more information on HS, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under the handle @hsheroesca. We hope the information was helpful, and thank you again so much to Suzanne for generously volunteering your time.
And I just want to say thank you to all of the patients who came out to come and learn, and who are going to be a part of this. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Good night.
Night.